Hello, listeners. Today's podcast is on leading transformation in a stressed sector. Our guest today is a leader who exemplifies humility, courage, and the ability to envision. I first met Dr. James MacDonald in 2012. It was in the early days of him taking over the leadership of the San Francisco Theological Seminary and embarking on a major transformation effort. I was fortunate to partner with Jim and his team on some of the change initiatives. SFTS was struggling financially. The trustees lacked confidence that the institution could survive, and many of the staff were openly critical of Jim's plans for transformation. They were challenging times on all fronts. On several occasions, I was witness to Jim's in-the-moment courageous response to open attacks on his leadership. While giving voice to his team, he remained steadfast to the core priorities when many others would have caved. At the time of the interview in 2018, Jim had successfully transformed SFTS, putting it well on the path to financial stability. In this podcast, Jim shares his journey of turning around an organization from the brinks of bankruptcy to one that is innovating and thriving in a stressed sector. Leaders who are shepherding transformation will find inspiring lessons to get through the most challenging times. So, Jim, thank you for joining us. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. My very first question to you, Jim, you took charge of the San Francisco Theological Seminary in July of 2011 after a very successful stint at Bread for the World, an organization that is focused on reducing world hunger. Now, when you came to San Francisco Theological Seminary, things were not looking that great. What were some of the challenges that were entailed in your role?
Right. Well, so back in 2011 was just, it's hard to remember back, that many years in terms of what was going on. But, if you remember, we were still in a recovery mode, that is the world, really, but the U.S. as well, from the financial meltdown in 2008, 2009. So, that was clearly a piece of the picture because seminaries that had like San Francisco Theological Seminary, I call it SFTS, we had an endowment. We still have an endowment, but it got hit hard during that time. And so that really had an effect on the ability of the seminary to finance its operations. And frankly, it had also been operating in less than ideal, in deficit spending before that. So this really could have been, if you will, a death blow in and of itself. But in the larger context of theological education, this is also a time, and it has been going on now for about at least 15 years, if not 2 decades, a time of declining enrollment in theological studies across the board, regardless of theological orientation or size of seminary or denomination. Every theological seminary has had to struggle with declining enrollment, and SFTS was certainly in that category as well. And then the specifics of the seminary added another dimension of a challenge, which is that the last several presidents here had not it had been a very tough time for the seminary. A lot of conflict between president and trustees, president faculty and trustees, faculty and president, et cetera, et cetera. And so, the seminary itself had been going through quite a lot trying to deal, if you just put those three things together, that's a pretty potent and difficult mix. So that was the challenge. And
so the challenge, if I may summarize, was you were in a business model that just wasn't sustainable with the declining enrollments in the seminary. The endowment that was stressed because of the time in our economic cycle. We had just come out of the recession, the Great Recession, and also the relationship between the trustees and the president. So a lot. I mean, was there anything that was going well?
Yeah. So some people said, so why did you think about coming here?
Right.
One of the hardest jobs there is. Even apart from all of the factors that we just talked about. But, I believed in theological education. I thought it's an important, maybe appreciated institution, not only within the church, but in the larger society, because it trains, not only professional clergy, who are going to be ordained in their particular denomination, but it also helps to even lay people, people who are in other vocations and not thinking about church as their main job, their main vocation, but they're doing other things and they want to increase their understanding of their faith and how faith can contribute to that. So seminaries do that. And, I had seen that very clearly working with Bread for the World, which is a faith-based organization. So I believed in what I was doing, and I saw a lot of, good here at SFTS and thought we should give it a whirl. We should try to do our best to see if we can, right the ship, if you will, and get back on course.
Which you did. I mean, we're now talking, that was 2011. This is 2018. You've clearly led a successful turnaround. I know in your view, there's more to be done. But at that time, it didn't look like you would make it past 2013, 2014. And we are, almost 4 years past that time. So there was a lot that needed to be changed. It was, I think you've mentioned in our prior conversation that it was clear the seminary couldn't continue with the existing business model. How did you recognize what needed to be changed, and what was your inspiration for the transformation?
I didn't come in with a master plan. I came in wanting to work with the plans that have been developed and see where, perhaps some new leadership, working with the board, working with the faculty, working with the different constituencies, the staff itself, we could, in a sense, raise the sights and do a better job with the current model. So I think, there was a question about whether, in my mind, and I think in others as well, whether we could take the current business model and simply do a better job of executing, right? Mm-hmm. So, improve the relationships with between faculty and trustees, improve the effectiveness of the board, do a better job of outreach to the alumni and so forth, all of this, a better job of fundraising. And for the first period of time, that was exactly what I did. I tried to do a better job following the model that was there. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I knew that we had to begin to think in new ways. And the question is where were the opportunities to move into those new areas? And so when there was an opportunity that presented itself, I tried to move in that area to make some specific changes. And so, but what actually, became clear after a while is that the model that we were pursuing wasn't actually going to work. Even if we had been, gold plated it and really done the best possible job with that model, it still wasn't going to work.
Let me ask you a question about that. When we met in 2012, 2013, you were right there. You knew the model couldn't work, but your faculty didn't believe that.
Right. Yeah.
And not sure that your trustees were with you as well.
Yeah. Right. So there was, I think, what I was experiencing with the SFTS faculty, first of all, is a kind of what happens with faculty anyway. It's where faculty, not just in theological education, but, in higher education generally, it's faculty who can be very, liberal and progressive in their own field. When it comes to their work as faculty, actually become quite conservative and really like to kind of do what they've done. And that was no different at SFTS.
And if I may interject, it's the same in the for-profit world as well.
Right.
Employees would rather do the things that they know they're good at.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because, it's hard to change. It's hard for anybody to change. And, real change, I mean, sure, reporting a half an hour later or half an hour earlier or something like that, that's not real change. But, if you have to do a different kind of job and set different kind of priorities and maybe even learn new skills and think in new ways, that's real change, and that's harder for people. So, with the and also with the faculty, they had been, because of all the conflict that had been here, so specifically to San Francisco Theological Seminary, was, there was a kind of way in which building trust between the president and the faculty had to start from scratch. And, that's been a long-term process. I think we actually have come a long way, but certainly in those first couple of years, there was that. The same thing, with all these relationships. So same thing with the board. There definitely were people on the board when I first came who, probably shared exactly what you said earlier, but that this was a sinking ship. And so I don't even know why they, thought they should call another president, but they did. But I think it didn't also change their opinion about whether they thought the seminary actually was viable in the long term. And so, if you're working with a board that doesn't actually believe that the institution can survive, that's that's very difficult. The board of any organization is really a key. People say that an organization is only as strong as its board, and the board is only as strong as its weakest member. So that's a kind of a tough statement, but you really have to spend a lot of time working to bring the board into some kind of coherence around a common vision. And that also took work. There was part of it was a strategic planning process. Part of it was going through a branding process. Part of it was making changes along the way. For instance, we went through a downsizing in 2013. That was during the time we were working together. And that challenge, they had to see, was it going to work? How was I, as the president, working in that situation? So each of these are kind of confidence building measures. And, so it takes time. So that,
I want to interrupt over here, and you said three things that were really important. One is you were faced with this situation where the board didn't have confidence in the institution in you, and you could have gone many different routes, some of which you did, which is, work on rebranding, new strategic vision, but you talked about building trust. You focused on building trust with your trustees and with your team. A lot of leaders would have made the choice to, if only we have a better plan, which the previous presidents didn't have, maybe everybody will come on board. But that's not where you stopped. Why did you focus on building trust?
Yeah, well, you can have a wonderful vision that you yourself think is just, best thing since sliced bread, but it's actually, but the definition of innovation is not simply that you have a new idea. It's a new idea that other people actually are willing to support, and if it's a product, to buy the product, or whatever it might be.
That's powerful, very powerful.
It's not just what's the next newest thing that I want to pursue, but actually, can I bring people along? And part of bringing people along means not losing sight of your vision, but actually trying to, if somebody brings an idea in, or a way to in a process, things begin to take a little bit different shape of being willing to go with that. And so people have ownership and sense of engagement and embrace of the new thing. So, it's you have to have that vision, and you keep putting it out there, but it also has to be flexible enough that you're willing to incorporate the ideas and the suggestions from other people, so they really can see themselves in it as well. So that's part of the trust building. Yeah.
I want to talk about one of those times when you were trying to bring people along, and this was a time when I was in the room with you and your team, and you had announced what the transformation would mean. I know you all had been talking about it, but it did require making those tough choices of reducing the number of faculty, taking a new direction, and you got a lot of pushback, and it was not pretty. I mean, you were sitting in the room, you were being directly attacked by your team, and you just, you listened, you gave them a chance to air their opinion. You took responsibility for the change, but you did something else. You squarely placed the responsibility for them getting on board. You placed that responsibility on the side of the faculty. And it is one of the most powerful moments that I have seen of a courageous leader in action. So if you can, this is years ago, but if you can take yourself back, how did you not become frustrated? How did you not get flustered by this situation?
Well, the first thing to say is that doesn't mean that actually, whatever you saw on the outside doesn't necessarily reflect on what's going on the inside. I was probably furious by what I was hearing. And, I think maybe my natural instinct would be to push back in any case. But I guess, along the way, life has taught me that I have to figure out how to actually, again, show that I'm listening to what people are saying. So there's a way of, of what they call active listening, where you feed back, you say, I hear your anger, I hear, your frustration and, unhappiness. So that's the first thing that actually makes someone feel like they're heard, is that mirroring of what you're hearing. And of course, if it's not, anyway, that can be a whole discussion of itself. But in this situation, then it's not just about their feelings. It's about what we're trying to accomplish. We have some common goals. We are an institution, not simply a rump group, or people have just gotten together for a drink, after work. We're trying to accomplish something. We have a larger responsibility. And so coming back to that was also a part of what happened. I remember exactly the incident you're talking about. I remember exactly where people were in the room. I remember who was speaking. I actually can't remember exactly the issues, which is interesting. But I know I know there was a sense that people were thinking that this process, I know what the process was. We were in the middle of searching for a dean, and this was the search committee. So it included trustees, included staff, included faculty. So that was the group in the room. You were there because we had brought in you and your organization to help us evaluate each of the candidates that came forward, and then to present using your model and your analysis and good work to actually help us be more objective with each other around the choices of where we would go with this. So that was the kind of context. I remember that very distinctly. And it was at the beginning of the meeting, and people were questioning maybe even why we were doing this, or, what was the point of this, and, why, I don't remember the specifics, but I do remember the context and where we needed to go, which was we needed to come up with a new dean. And we were going to do that process. We couldn't let it go. I think maybe they were saying we should postpone it, or we should not look for a dean, or something like that.
Right, and they also had a very different idea of what the dean should look like, which is why they thought it should be one among them. And
Right.
your vision was the seminary needed to take a new direction. And in fact, we spent quite a bit of time with the trustees, with the faculty, defining what that role should look like. And I think that by itself is an interesting exercise in transformation. I don't see too many organizations spending time thinking about, who should we bring in order for us to, proceed with the transformation or accelerate the transformation process, which is what you were trying to do, is redefine the role of the vice, I think it was the vice chancellor of academic affairs
Yeah.
position.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right. And so that, right. And of course, faculty have a stake in that. What will what will this person do when they come? What kind of changes and what threats will be presented? They don't necessarily think of opportunities; they think of threats. And so, and that had been their experience in the past. So it was very understandable, on the one hand, that they would have this reaction, but that couldn't hold us back. We had to move forward. So, it wasn't.
So I want to interrupt over here. You just said something that couldn't hold us back. But, some leaders would have said, well, maybe I need to retreat. Because this dissent was not just that day. I mean, it had been going on for a while.
Yeah.
But you chose not to retreat.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So, I mean, it's, yeah, I don't know what to say about that, except that, it was that sense that if we were going to make the changes, if we were going to actually get to a new place, these things had to be, it couldn't just be that when somebody presents a problem or an issue or a pushback that we just roll over. We had to kind of keep moving. And so how are we going to keep moving? So, honestly, I didn't know. I mean, we know now how that conversation worked itself out, but it actually could have gone a lot differently. I don't know what could have happened, but, just maybe people would have walked out of the room. Maybe, maybe the whole group would have rallied around the point of view of the faculty, and we would have, then I would have had another issue to deal with. But as it worked out, I think, partly what was also happening there was, I think, the other people who were not directly engaged in the exchange, which was really an exchange between the faculty and the president. So the staff and the trustees were watching. So they were really wanting to see, what is the dynamic here? What's going to happen? They were probably as much on pins and needles as anybody, because they saw, here's the situation, there's an issue that's come up, how will it be resolved? So I think in the way that it actually did resolve itself in a good way, and we did move on, also gave, if you will, courage to the others in the room who watched this, to say, wow, we're not going to be stuck. We can actually move. And, Yeah.
What you just said is really important, that the trustees and the faculty were watching, and you did something interesting. It wasn't like so you were having one-on-one conversations, but you brought them all into the fold, and had a combined conversation.
Hmm.
And essentially, I remember at the beginning of our discussions, they all had different ideas, or they thought they had different ideas of what the future of this academic affairs role should look like. And then in the end, when we, through all the conversations, the work that we did, using more sort of a data-based approach, it seemed like they all said, oh yeah, I think this sounds like a good idea. And it seemed like they all felt like it was something that they contributed to and they agreed with. And so I think the method that you use brought them on the same page as well, where, some other leaders would have said, I'm going to have these one-on-one conversations and try to bring everyone together.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I mean, that's the advantage of doing something in a group context. I mean, there are different ways, sort of depends on the issue and the situation. Sometimes it is better perhaps to let it go in a group, committee meeting or in a group discussion, and try to then go to people individually to kind of work things out. But, there's also an advantage, again, because the group itself, groups have their own character and their own behavior. And in a way, without sort of saying, here are the norms we're going to follow, the norms actually emerge in groups and committees, by what actually happens or doesn't happen. So, if you go into a committee meeting or a group, some kind of meeting of some sort, and it becomes clear that actually the only person in the room who really matters is the person who's chairing the meeting, and he or she has just got an agenda, and they just want us to, rubber stamp it. And there's really you can try, people might try to see if they can have move the agenda or have some influence in the agenda, but it might become very clear very quickly. There's no room for discussion here. They're just really wanting the rubber stamp, and that's it. And then that's what you get. But in the meantime, you don't have the buy-in of people. You actually have this quiet resentment of people who think, they brought me in, they wasted my time bringing me into a meeting where they didn't really care what contributions and the rest of us could make to this conversation. They just wanted to ram their agenda through. So, I think as someone who often brings an agenda to a meeting myself as president, I have to watch that myself, that I'm not simply trying to ram through an agenda, but I have to be able to have people be able to interact with it honestly, as in their real way, and bring whatever questions and doubts and into that process. So that's the beauty of, if you will, of the power maybe of meetings when you have the whole group. A lot can happen for good or for ill, and some of it is about the norms that have nothing to do with the specific content.
That what you just said is, I think, extremely important for any leaders, but particularly those who are getting work done through teams, which is norms emerge based on what happens in the team. It's what people experience. And I think oftentimes companies forget, they have all these documents with, values and mission and vision, but it's really what's happening in action and what people are experiencing that shapes the norms and therefore the culture of the organization.
Yeah. So, this is tricky, because sometimes, I think, again, those of us who are, at the top of an organization have a certain, we lead, we can't help but lead from the top down in terms of an agenda, but because that's where we are, right? So and people in one sense look to their leaders of their organizations and expect, if you're a president or a CEO or whatever the title is, that you're going to actually you're going to help focus the organization. And so that if you don't try to focus the organization, nobody else really is in a position to do it. So it's a responsibility that comes with with the role, if you will. And but top down, you need you also need buy-in, and how you do that, and how you really actually let ideas and visions bubble up is important to the process. And people can get frustrated. People in my position, CEOs or presidents or whatever, can get frustrated because, we know exactly where we want that organization to go, and it's taking much longer because we know today where it should be tomorrow, but in bringing people along, you're not going to get there tomorrow. It's going to take a longer period of time. So you have to work kind of with all due deliberate speed, and keep your eye on the vision and try to keep people pointed in the right direction. But at the same time, you're trying to bring people along, even as you're moving. And that might, that's going to actually mean some adjustments along the way. And what will those adjustments be? So.
And what you said, I think every leader faces that. The good news is if they can see tomorrow, they have the vision of what the future is going to look like. They can rally their forces. But then you said something else that's important, which is you have to have the patience to bring people along for everyone else to buy into that vision, so then you can start working towards tomorrow. And what can leaders like you do to grow that patience? Because that's the hardest part. We find a lot of times leaders, give up because it's taking too long to influence the change.
Yeah. So, the other piece of this is that you don't have to have 100%. You're not trying to convince the most reticent, reluctant person to come along. I mean, maybe there are situations where that's true, but for the most part, you need the leadership, and you need the bulk of people to understand. And actually, if people really don't get it, they're going to leave. They should leave. And so, if they stay around trying to, pull the organization in a different direction, then that's where, maybe you part ways, because, and it's for their own good. Why would they waste their time working in an organization where they don't really believe what the organization is doing? Life is too short. Once again, don't waste your time. Go be liberated from this job and go find the job that you really want to do. So, it's true that as you're moving through this, there are going to be people, and there, certainly in part of the process that I have experienced here at the San Francisco Theological Seminary is that, there are people who are no longer here because actually they got off the bus, if you will. They decided, this is not for me, or I just don't like this direction, and I need to go somewhere else. And that's okay. But you're still, I think there's also been a kind of management, I don't know, I think it was more prevalent in the 80s and 90s, and maybe it's being changed now. But, where people just come in and basically, sort of a wrecking ball to the whole organization and, change everything up and throw people out. And, people are, dazed and confused and not really understanding what's going on. And that was sort of seen as being a strong leader because, you're really messing up the culture, that's been a drag on the organization and so forth. Well, there are organizations that need a lot of shaking up, so there's no question that some of that's going to happen. But, it's not, the wrecking ball is not necessarily the way to do management, I think. So.
Yeah. So I want to switch topics here. You've not only made the organization financially solvent, but you did something that is really hard to do in your sector, which you've been innovating with your team.
You're listening to the Exponential Talent Podcast on leading transformation in a stressed sector. Our guest today is Dr. James MacDonald, President of the San Francisco Theological Seminary.
Talk to us a little bit about that. in what ways has the San Francisco Theological Seminary innovated to aid its sustainability?
Great question. Well, so, one of the innovations actually isn't much of an innovation in one sense, but it was for SFTS, which was to move a lot of our programs online. So we were a completely residential seminary. People came here. We have, housing for students and housing for faculty. Here in Marin, that's almost a necessity. But it was clear that if we were really going to begin to grow our enrollment and actually also grow our revenue, we needed to move online. So, to do that required actually seeing it as a strategic move, not as a incremental, let's get a few courses here, a few courses there, but actually that was where I came in to the trustees and to the faculty and to the staff and said, we need to move online and we need to do it quickly. And so, bring in outside consultants who can help us, navigate that startup part of, what you need to have in place in order to actually have successful online programs. And, even that, so we actually did it in about a year. We were actually up and we had our first degree program online, which is for educational institution rather quick. But it means we're still working with that in terms of what really works. You've got to, get the system in place, train faculty, get the right equipment, and, there's just a lot that goes into the move online. So for us, that was an innovation. The other thing was something we called the Center for Innovation and Ministry here that was really put into the strategic plan back in 2013. And it was, someone said, an idea without a plan. So people like the idea that putting the idea of innovation and ministry in the same sentence. People liked that. And they thought that was great, but they didn't know exactly what it meant. And frankly, we didn't either in terms of what that would be. So we did begin to do we actually used, design theory and partnered with an organization, again, that was interested in design theory and process to help us think about innovation in new ways. So design thinking is really an important part of what we've brought into the seminary itself. And then we hired this guy, Floyd Tompkins, who's an amazing person, brings in a background that is really rich in terms of his experience. Both he's been in the very top echelons of world-class institutions like Princeton University and Stanford University, but he's also been in rural South Georgia, working among very poor African American, Hispanic, and white youth, and he did that for 15 years. So he's been in lots of different places. He's a pastor, but he's also really, truly an innovator. And he, we were very fortunate to be able to hire him in and give him the tools, but also the freedom to develop this Center for Innovation and Ministry. And he came in February of 2016, so just about 2.5 years ago. And he has actually begun to really shape that center in profound ways. And I think that's also, brought us engaged, allowed the seminary to engage with new constituencies, to try new programs, to really do things that I think begin to model how innovation can function in ministry. And so that's been very exciting. And it's been one of those, it has, the program has developed alongside of our academic programs. So the center, for instance, does certificates and courses and seminars and things like that, but not degree programs. So our degree programs, how can we develop a synergy between the academic degree programs and the center? That's something we're continuing to work on. That's part of the innovation process, but we couldn't legislate it. We have to kind of, in my estimation, it has to emerge organically from the interaction between those two things.
And if I understand correctly, those certificates are not so much for those looking to join the ministry, but it's for regular people, right?
Yep.
Could you tell us what some of the topics are?
What's that?
What are some of the certifications that you're offering right now?
Right. So,
what are they focused on?
Well, there's one a program we have in spirituality and mental health, and we're partnering with the university to do that. We have another certificate that's on social entrepreneurship and spirituality, and for that we brought in faculty, really world-class faculty from different institutions to work on this, and really help people who are interested in making a difference in the world, give them the tools to do that, but also to give them the spiritual resources to actually sustain their work. So if they're in social change, that social change is a long-term commitment, and people need their own ways. How do I sustain my own spirit when I'm trying to make change? And change is not a straight line. It's very much something that has its plus. It's zigs and it zags. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of experience. And so you need the spiritual resources, and it's not for some that's Christian, but in some cases for others it's maybe not. It's a secular kind of meditation, whatever it might be. So we try to design those courses in a broad way and bring people together. And then when what's magic in this is when those people come from different backgrounds and different aspirations and different religious points of view or no religion, when they come together, there's a great bonding, and they become kind of a cohort, that continues on past the course. So it's really exciting to see that happen.
Thank you for explaining that. And for the sake of our audience, what I want to highlight is many of them are asking, why is this an innovation? And I think we have to look at what is happening, particularly in the United States, and the change in demographics and religiosity, to understand why this is such an important innovation, and one that is actually really astute. So according to, I don't have the most recent statistics, but I think 3 years ago when I was looking at this, in the United States, about 63% of the population is what's considered the nuns, meaning they don't have any specific religious affiliation. And so what you have done is you have broadened your reach to not just to who claim Christianity as their religion, or Presbyterians, but also to those who are not. And so just recognizing what is the population that you can serve and expanding your services to serve a larger population, I think is brilliant. And that's where the innovation is so important. And it was a brilliant move to include options for those who are not particularly religious.
Yeah, and that is actually part of the way the MO, if you will, of the Center for Innovation is really to bring together, unlikely partners is maybe one way to look at it, but people who don't necessarily interact with each other for a variety of reasons, and religion itself is a difficult. People have strong opinions. They're either deeply engaged in some form of religious practice or belief system, and and then other people want to have nothing to do with it. So when you bring those people together around something different, like mental health or like social entrepreneurship or other things, it's exciting to see what can happen at that point. So in other words, instead of taking religion off the table, it brings it onto the table as a part of the conversation, not to convert anybody, but just, again, so we have greater understanding of ourselves and of others in that process.
And that's something I want to say about the seminary, having worked with you and your faculty. What I really enjoyed is this openness. We go to a seminary and you assume that it's all very religious of a particular kind, but there was really an intellectual curiosity about the topic of religion, which is what your faculty are expert on, and really well-being as the focus of it. So I found that to be very, very enlightening, very welcoming to people of different backgrounds, and I think that you've done a really wonderful job building that culture.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's certainly one of the things we've been trying to do, and I think we're moving in that direction. So, and it's really part of the DNA of the seminary going back. It just looked different, in different decades, but this is where we are, in this part of the 21st century. So.
There's two questions that I want to talk about. In our prior conversations, you highlighted the importance of having the right talent on board, and you said that you mentioned that it took you a while to really know who would be the best fit to help with the transformation that you were leading. So talk to us a little bit about the importance of getting the right talent and knowing who is your best talent.
Yeah. Well, that's a important topic, and also interesting because Jim Collins in his book, talking about getting the right people on the, good to great, mm-hmm. Getting the right people on the bus, sitting in the right seats. That's kind of what you're talking about. And, the conventional wisdom is that, that's your first year. You get everybody in the right seats on the bus. The other thing is that you give them a clear job to do, goals to, and then you turn them loose to kind of accomplish, and assume also that they're smarter than you. That you don't have to have people who are. It's actually good to be surrounded by people who are smarter than you are, because that's going to help the whole process. And it is what the whole process is about. So I had all that coming into the job here in 2011 in terms of my understanding. So I did try to get the right people on the bus and, get a good team put together in that first year. But I would say that, I'm in my 8th year now. It wasn't until my 6th year that I actually saw that accomplished. So the team that I had, again, this depends on the organization and where you are. We're not Amazon, or we're not, an organization where people are just really wanting to work for us. Yes, people actually do want to work for us, but it's not like we have a huge talent pool to draw from and people knocking at our doors. And so, we to try to find the right people who can do the jobs that need to be done, that really are going to not just carry out a function, but actually contribute to this innovation and to the turnaround and to the new thing that we're trying to be and do as a seminary. That was not easy, because, so I think, the team that I now have that has now been working together for about 2.5 years is the best I've ever worked with. Not just at not just here at San Francisco Theological Seminary, but anytime. Bread for the Right. This is a great team. They really do work together. They're not, we have our arguments. So when we meet, we meet once a week, Monday mornings for an hour and a half, and we mix it up. So if somebody brings a question in, we may spend most of the meeting arguing about that or, discussing it. And so it's not as though it's just, again, not rubber stamp, but we're all on the same page in terms of this is what we're trying to do. This is what we're trying to accomplish. Everybody has their role. And where there are issues, we need to deal with the issues. So.
Let me just pause over here. Do you need to attend to something, Jim, or I have just a couple more questions?
Yeah, no, I've got to be on the call at 11, so I have about 20 minutes, but maybe we could, maybe we should say 15, and so I can
Sure.
the transition.
Okay, sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna, we'll cut this part out, so no worries about that. So going back to the conversation, you're talking about how it took you really 6 years to get the right people in the seats. But I'm wondering for our, leaders who are listening in, how do you know who's going to be the right talent? So I know this is a really broad question. What I'm trying to get at is how did you realize that here's what I need to be done, and this is the right kind of person, even before you found them? Or is it that you found the right person and then figured, hey, this is, they're the best suited to do the job?
Yeah, I think, I mean, when we look for specific people, for instance, the vice president for, that is in charge of the Center for Innovation Ministry, Floyd Tompkins, we put out a job description and opened it up for a wide search. And really all the positions had that kind of sense of, let's define the position, but, within that position, what you're also trying to do is build a team. And so I think in the course of doing the hiring process, you want to focus in to get the person who's able to execute the job in the best possible way and brings, the broadest knowledge and experience to that's possible. But, in the interview, you also want to make sure that somewhere along the way that they're meeting with the other members of the executive team, because in the end, there is a fit aspect of this, is how well will they be able to work with the others who are already here. And, the fit and so you've really got both fit and qualifications to look at. And each of those is important. You don't want to skimp on one or the other. So keeping those two things together is really important.
Great. So making sure that the person can do the job, and then they also can work well with the team.
Yeah.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. You have an important role in the community as a spiritual leader, and we are living in, if I may call it, politically and economically challenging times, particularly in the Bay Area. Politically, I don't have to say more about it, but economically, there is this big divide between the haves and the have-nots. What are you seeing in particular as some of the key challenges around well-being, and any advice you have for business leaders in terms of what they should do to make things better?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's an important one for business leaders to think about, because it really does speak to something larger, which is, it's, I think, 100 years ago when Henry Ford, started making Fords, he wanted to make sure that the people who worked in the factories could actually afford to buy the car. So he needed to pay them the wages necessary for that, called Fordism sometimes. And, we're in a kind of a different place in terms of the economy, but it's true that what we're seeing is that this gap that you're talking about means that a lot of people can't afford, they're struggling to live, period. And so actually, I mean, paycheck to paycheck, for some, it is a struggle to survive because they're really at the margins and very vulnerable, poor people, even low-wage workers. So they're working, maybe one, maybe two, maybe sometimes three jobs to support their families. That's exhausting. And it's, why would we ask people to work two jobs? I'm not talking about couples each working. I'm talking about one person who finishes one job after 8 hours, goes and works a second job. There's a lot of that in our economy because they need the income to survive. And if I'm a CEO, well, if I'm my company's selling furs, well, maybe I don't worry about it because it's a luxury brand. But on the other hand, if you want people to really participate in the economy and you want your business to thrive, you should actually be concerned about the larger economy, whether it's the local or regional economy, but also the national economy. And, we have a stock market that's, it's in a kind of volatility moment, but, it's basically thriving. The people at the top are thriving, the top 10% of the economy, but for more than a majority of people, I would say maybe 60% of the population, it is really a struggle to survive. And we actually need to make some changes in our economy, in the economy itself, and to lessen that. This is not simply I'm trying to make an economic argument here, which is also a social argument, which is to say it's not simply a matter of, it's redistribution, for the sake of redistribution. That's not the point. The point is actually an economy is actually, the root word of economy is the same word for the word for household. So, we all are in this together. And just because I can make millions of dollars, and somebody else is struggling trying to make 20,000 or 30,000 or 40,000 and support their family, there's something that's not right about that. And it's not as though, but we as business leaders or leaders of institutions, we can try to carry out our responsibilities for that in the way the institution works, to pay our workers fairly, to give them benefits, to give them a hand up, if you will, so that we can do our part. And actually, we should be talking with our other CEOs and other leaders in the business community to really change this. Here in the Bay Area, you've got me wound up now. Here in the Bay Area, the housing issue is huge, and it's actually an issue, in other parts of the country as well, mostly on the coast. But Austin, Texas, growing at huge, very fast. Tech sector is growing by leaps and bounds in Austin, and they can't stop there. But the price of housing is also in Austin, Texas, is going up hugely because of that influx of workers with a lot of money. And so there's got to be a different way of doing housing, whether it's rentals or buying housing. We haven't really taken that issue seriously yet. And so, I think it's, here in the seminary, it affects us because when we go to hire a staff person, they can't live in Marin and the wages that we pay. Many of them are having to, drive for an hour or more to get to work. So, that takes away from family time. It has real consequences for the social fabric of our country and of this, this area. So, there's ways in which we're all part of this and need to try to do something to address these inequities that you're talking about.
Yeah, and certainly, in Marin, one of the most expensive real estates in the United States, and that's where you're based, so you're definitely seeing the disparity. And the Bay Area has a lot of challenges, both with income inequality, lack of housing, and companies claim they can attract the right kind of talent. And there's a lot of, what's coming out of that is stress, people feeling overwhelmed, overworked, So lots of issues that CEOs have to be mindful of, and thank you for highlighting all of these and just calling for action on the part of the leaders.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you. Now, so as a final note, what advice do you have for any leader that is preparing to lead transformation, particularly in the for-profit world? I think a lot of your experiences translate very well. So any words of wisdom for them?
Oh, well, this brings to mind something that I know we've talked about in the past. It's a book that I came across about, I don't know, 10, probably 15 years, I'm not sure how many years ago, mid 2000s, called Egonomics. And it's not economics, but it's egonomics. And it's about teams and leadership of teams. And I don't remember the authors now, two men. And I went to one of their seminars as well as read the books and looked at all the materials and so forth. And it was very impressive. But I still remember exactly what the main 3 points in that book, which was, what builds powerful teams and utilizes ego in the best possible way, which is what they're trying to point to, are 3 things. One is humility. And they define humility, I think, in a way that people can understand, which is that, none of us has everything that's needed to get something done. So humility means understanding what our strengths are, but also where our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities are, and realizing that in a team, and this is something we were talking about earlier in the interview, in a team, listening to other people and getting their input and actually realizing that they're smarter than you are in certain areas and can do things that you can't do, is a part of being humble. And so, that means appreciating the gifts that others bring, as well as, your own gifts. But you have to appreciate the gifts that other people bring to the task that you're trying to accomplish. And the second thing is then inquisitiveness, which is to ask questions. And this is for me, I always call this my Achilles heel, because if somebody says something and you think, oh, we've done that a million times before, or that's the stupidest question I've ever, or statement I've ever heard. Actually, what they're counseling is ask a question, be inquisitive. So tell me why you say that, or what's your reasoning behind that, so that you actually draw them out rather than dismiss it. And so that it's a discipline to ask questions when others make comments, to learn more and not just assume that what you're hearing first out of somebody's mouth is the whole thing that's there. They're actually trying to, all of us have kind of a book behind every sentence that we utter. And so what is that for people? There's some experience there that has led them to say X or Y or whatever it is. So inquisitiveness. And then the third is what he calls water cooler honesty, which is where they define this as basically being able to bring problems to the table rather than just discuss them around the water cooler. So the water cooler is where we all go informally, in between the meetings, and while, we're doing this, to have our conversations. And that's where people really talk about what's happening. But when you get into the meeting, you leave all that behind and you talk as though none of these problems really exist. So they say, bring forward the issues that need to be addressed. If there's if we're running a deficit, let's not ignore the fact that we're running a deficit and pretend like everything is okay. We need to actually work on that and make something happen. So those 3 pieces of egonomics have stuck with me as really important ways in which we as CEOs or presidents or leaders of organizations need to function in order to really get the best out of our staff, but also for the organization.
It's very powerful to hear it from you, because I know that you live this every day, or at least the times that I have seen you. Humility, curiosity, and water cooler honesty. I've never heard the water cooler honesty part, but really, really important. And it seems like these are easy to understand, hard to do concepts.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so it's easy to say them, but on a day-to-day basis, and when you're, in those meetings, when something comes up and what you're thinking is, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, you have to kind of do a little back up a little bit, and self-reflection, and before you really go forward. Yeah.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for your time. This has been tremendously insightful, and what is most powerful about this conversation is you are the one in the job. You are doing the leader's job. You're heading an organization. You've led transformation. You've led innovation. And to get your insights is just real world. And things that leaders who follow some of this advice that you have offered, there's a good chance that they can get there too. So thank you again. I really appreciate it, and always a pleasure speaking with you.
I really appreciate this time to be in conversation with you, and thank you for your work that you've been doing, certainly with us, but with others as well. And really appreciate what you're able to accomplish. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you.
That's it, listeners. That was our Exponential Talent podcast on leading transformation in a stressed sector with Dr. James MacDonald. In today's world, we continue to debate if leaders should be bold and dominant or humble and subdued. New research on leadership shows that humble leaders build stronger teams and win in the marketplace compared to bold and brash leaders. Jim's story certainly aligns with these findings. If you've been inspired by this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share. Until the next time, goodbye from your host, Shreya Sarkar Barney.